Welcome to this Monstrous Flesh podcast miniseries, Monstrous Flesh Summer Camp. Bring your marshmallows and your sleeping bag as we huddle around the campfire to discuss some of the sweatiest and most bloodthirsty summer horrors. I'm Meg, one of your camp counsellors.
And I'm Clelia, the other camp counsellor.
And in this mini-series, we're diving into our summer of screams. And today, on the last day of camp, we find ourselves trying to capture the flag and beat the witch's curse at Camp Nightwing. Dun, dun, dun.
Yes.
Last day of camp, Clelia.
I know, it's so sad. It's a summer that's gone so fast, and there's been so many murders, so many mysteries to solve,
so many mysteries, so many memories,
shorts. Exactly, it's a summer that will stay with us forever.
Exactly.
For better or worse.
We are forever changed by this summer of screams. But would you like to give us then our synopsis for this time?
For one last synopsis. I'll try my best, but I want to give enough. I mean, I've really struggled actually to write this one because I wanted to give enough context about this one is the second part of the third part series in Fear Street. So I wanted to give it enough, but not too much. Yeah. So you'll have to let me know how I did.
Okay.
All right, let's go. Let's try it. Shadyside, best known as America's murder capital, is once again the site of a flurry of brutal killings in 1994. Unbeknownst to them, Dina and her friends find themselves at the center of it all when, after accidentally disturbing the burial site of the witch Sarah Fear, they find themselves stalked by supernatural killers. The teens track down C. Sherman, the only known survivor of the centuries-spanning curse of the doomed witch Sarah Fear. It's now time to link the past to the present and hopefully unearth the gruesome truth. So there we find ourselves in Shadyside, July 1978, against the backdrop of the endless feud between the teenagers of Shadyside and Sunnyvale. A spate of brutal axe murders terrorizes the unsuspecting campers of Camp Nightwing. Can the survivors break the curse before dawn breaks?
Oh, very good. Very good. Yes.
Did I give away too much? I'm not sure.
No, I think that was fine. I think that was wonderful.
I have to thank you, first of all, because when we first decided to do this miniseries, I was like, please, can we cover Fear Street? So I'm really glad that you've allowed us to do it in
I
this
have
last
allowed
episode.
it. Yes, that is the way this podcast goes.
Listeners, this is very much a dictatorship. I have to plead with Meg to let me cover some films. Of course not, but
no, I think it were a brilliant choice.
Oh, I'm so glad you like it. I'm currently not talking to my partner because he didn't like the third one. And I was just like, no, I'm sorry. I was like, we can't. No, this isn't happening. I want a divorce.
I'm sorry. We're done. That's it. Game over. I choose Sarah Fear.
Yeah. I know a lot of people didn't have a great reaction to it. But yeah, I mean, what were your expectations with the Fear Street trilogy in general? Are they, did you know the books? Did you read them growing up, or... did you have any expectations going in?
I didn't, but I am going to read them because I were a massive Goosebumps and Point Horror fan as a child, and so I obviously really liked R.L. Stine, and so I've not read him, but I'm gonna read him after this. And I had seen the first one a while ago, and then we're gonna watch second and third part, and then just never got around to it. So when you suggested it, I were really pleased actually, because I thought it gives me an excuse to go back and to watch it. So I watched all three. And I think that they're really good. I give 4 stars to each installment.
Oh, amazing!
Yeah, I really like them.
This Hugh I need to marry.
That's it. This is it. Come on, it's been building to this. We all knew it.
Exactly.
But
I
do think that it's really nice, and why I was glad that you picked it as well is because it's nice to have a contemporary sort of summer slasher, because we've very much been in like the 80s, which is fine, and the heyday of the summer slasher, but we've had a lot of problems, and you've all had to hear about it.
Exactly, you've heard it all. So it's really great to finish with this one, which is a contemporary retelling and reimagination of the 80s summer camp. And I really love that, and I think this is what a lot of people had a problem with. So it's kind of like, it's trying too hard, and I was kind of like, no, it's trying just the right amount, in fact. And it's really great to be able to address some of the problematic, stuff that we've come up against talking about the film set in the 80s. It'd be kind of like, it's great to have a chance to revisit this era, but with a more contemporary lens. So it's all good in my books.
Absolutely. And I think I was quite shocked. I mean, I love that it was set in 78. I was like, brilliant, and I really, so we know from, and obviously there's going to be spoilers in this, and there's probably going to be spoilers about Fear Street Part 1 and 2 as well. 3, I should say. So, if you've not watched them, watch them all, because we'll probably go back and forth.
Exactly. Pause now and
come back. But I think what were interesting for me is obviously you see from end of Part 1 and then going into Part 2 is that idea about, generational trauma, but also repercussions of violence with, with Ziggy, and an idea about, someone who they've lived through such a horrible event, but you can't move on. So you've survived it, but are you even alive anymore at that point? I think that were a really interesting perspective on it, and that is a direction that horror, which I'll talk about in my recommendations, but like horror is going in, and I think it's important because we've talked about true crime before on this podcast, and I think there's a very unhealthy obsession with that in society at the minute, and I think there's never any discussion about people who survive these sorts of events. What are their lives like? And that's something as a society that, I'm sorry, I've gone deep. Sorry, I started deep.
No, it's great. No, I'm so glad we go straight in at the deep end. No, it's brilliant. Carry on.
But just this idea that, people who survive really awful traumatic things, that they're pushed aside, and all anybody ever talks about is people who've died, which the people who've died are not, and generally aren't talked about, other than as an extension of the person who's killed them. So there's a problem there in that way anyway. But I think, people who survive, it's as though they're sort of cast off, well, you've lived through
Forgotten
it.
about,
and, we never really, I suppose, we never think about the survivors of our summer slashers. And perhaps I think what this does really well is it does that. It takes someone who survived it and goes, what does that look like after 30 years? 20 years, 30 years. So, I really liked that about it. And that's from the off, he picks that up.
No, I loved it, and especially to put Gillian Jacobs in that role as well. I absolutely adore her anyway. Yeah. So I thought it was such a delight to see her on screen. But yeah, and I love the what you just talked about. The curse that's running through all three films is very much a metaphor for that intergenerational trauma, and we will deep dive a lot more into it as we talk about the three films. But yeah, I think it was it's really great. I think all three films are very different, bring very different things to it. I just love all the reference, and the fact that they are using some well-known and loved tropes, from every decades, and whilst updating them at the same time, and it's doing its own thing. And I just thought it was such a fresh, take on slashers in general. But should I give us a little? A little bit of context, both. No. It's really great to actually dive at the deep end. But just to give people a little bit of context, although I'm sure, so the Fear Street books, and R.L. Stine has obviously an incredible legacy, and I'm sure most of our listeners have grown in the same era as us, so they'll be well acquainted with this. But the films are inspired by the book series Fear Street by self-processed Stephen King of children's literature, Robert Lawrence Stine, or R.L. Stine for the initiated. He's the author of hundreds of horror fiction novels, including the books In the Fear Street, Goosebumps, Goosebump, Rotten School, Mostly Ghostly, and the Nightmare Room series. R.L. Stine was, and you mentioned that at the start, like a gateway drug for teen horror readers in the 90s with Goosebumps and Fear Street before they graduated to reading Stephen King, just as the TV series was a gateway drug for kids before they discovered Tales from the Crypt, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
The original Fear Street book series ran from roughly 1989 until 1997 and comprises 51 books, so it is super prolific. And the films are not based on any books in particular, but rather are an amalgam of the adventures taking place in the fictionalized town of Shadyside and feature average teenagers caught up in murder mysteries. These were the days. So saying this, Fear Street 1978, the film we're covering today, obviously, is probably the one most closely related to one of the books, which is called Lights Out. Although the narrative differs from the book, like the film, it takes place like Camp Nightwing, and camp counselors are under attack from a mysterious killer. But how do you turn Fear Street into a movie or even three? Well, that's where American writer-director Lee Janiak forged a bold new path. So a little bit of background on her. In 2014, she wrote and directed her first feature, the horror film Honeymoon. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it is such a great film, by the way. I don't know. Yeah, I've watched it. I mean, I've come across it just on doing the research for the podcast and ended up watching it. And I think it's so great. It definitely plays into the less you show, the more tension you create horror ethos that we love. So I think at some point we should definitely talk more about this one. Really, really good. So not only did she and her collaborators craft a new narrative that could easily find its place in the spooky neighborhood imagined by Steins, but also they created a trilogy that defies the expectation of slasher sequels, blurring the lines between film and television. And some really good news, actually, if people did enjoy the series. And, you know, obviously they were released during COVID in July 2020. You know, every couple of weeks, I think they were released. They were originally they were supposed to be released in cinema, so that was a real shame. But Netflix then picked it up, and they were released in July 2020 or 2021. I'm not sure. I can't remember now. But some good news though is that there are more films in development apparently. In the series, written by Janiak as well. So that should be really exciting. But I was also really surprised to find out that this series is a long time in the making, because it was the book rights were bought by Hollywood Pictures in 1997. You know that they wanted to develop a Scream-like feature franchise, but obviously then it was kind of change of hands, etc., and it was picked up again in July 2017, and that's where Lee Janiak came into play. And interestingly enough, so she has only one feature directing to credit to her name, but she directed a few episodes of the Scream TV series. If you watched that. So, and obviously she's a massive horror fan, so I think she was kind of the perfect fit to direct the series, really.
Yeah.
I think that's it.
Yeah. No, brilliant. Sorry, I got too excited and got in front of myself, but I love your production section. It's always so interesting because I think, and yeah, you hear that a lot. People buy up rights and then, apparently Steven Spielberg's terrible for it. He buys rights and then he just don't make them. And, like people, don't sue me, by the way, Steven Spielberg.
No, but it is terrible because things get shelved then for years and years and years, and it's so unfair.
And then, like you said, then a studio changes hands, and then whoever takes over goes, we don't want to prioritise that, and things just get lost. And I mean, it's the Goosebumps books and TV series and everything else is, I mean, for people like our age, and it's like the gateway drug. It's like a pivotal moment in the childhoods of people in the 80s, 90s, and even like early 2000s. So they're really significant. And obviously, I saw Goosebumps films and loved them. I mean,
Oh my God,
absolutely fantastic. Yeah. But that's really interesting as well. And I think to take books like that and translate them into onto the screen is difficult. It's not just and especially when it's not just a straight adaptation either. It's like got to understand the story and then
exactly. Yeah, just to take the overall idea and to create a brand new narrative and to make those 3 films out of it that are so cohesive.
Absolutely,
so,
they are really cohesive. That's one thing I did think. There's a real. I mean, there's the thread obviously of the story, but that's difficult as well because they're dealing with history and they're dealing with timelines, but it never feels to me at least like it's always very logical how you sort of watch it. But yeah, it's thrilled me that, to be honest. That were very interesting. But yeah, well.
So saying this, sorry, what did you, how do you think that Fear Street 1978 holds up stylistically compared to, the other slashes that we've talked about? Do you think that they portrayed it correctly or, updated it in some respect, but like in the style of it, I thought was very distinct. But what did you make of it?
I think that this is a perfect example, actually, of appreciation versus like commercialization, because we've talked about the films that have been made because slashers were popular and money making, and we've talked about in The Burning about how just taking a story and not even changing it and just putting it into a film don't really make a good film. But I think what you can see in Fear Street 1978 is a love of the genre, an appreciation of it, which then translates into a very stylistically and thematically, oh God, she's on it today, thematically, very cohesive and very strong and very enjoyable. Like, it's very entertaining and it's got all them tropes, but a bit like, I suppose, Madman Mars, it's like they've got the tropes, but they're doing it in a way that don't feel like hacky or cliche.
Yeah, subvert them.
It feels like it's a celebration of the summer camp slasher. That's how I watched it anyway. What about you?
Yeah, no, I thought it was, I think stylistically, it's kind of, obviously, it arcs back to, all the, all the things that we know and love from that era, but, does it with a real love of the genre rather than, trying to simply emulate, the same thing. I think it kind of, brings it up to date. And I think in terms of the themes that the film deals with, it has a lot more meat on the bones. It's really funny because I was reading an interview from the director, and she was saying how she was influenced by Friday the 13th to make this second part. And obviously, as we know, Friday the 13th was, barely any story in it. So it's amazing that, and stylistically you can definitely recognize the influence of it, but, there's so much more, in it that it brings to it that, I don't know. I think it's really hard to make, period set pieces and do it in a way that isn't, try hard rather than do it something. And I think this very much does it something.
Yeah.
And it's great.
And I was surprised, not surprised, I suppose, from watching 94. But I mean, it's really violent. It's really gory, but I think what surprised me when we first meet Ziggy, when that knobhead just knocked her off her feet, like hit her in face, and she. I can't say what we noticed because it uses C-bombs. I mean, I've had to stop with C-bombs because I think we probably have to draw a line at that, or Spotify's not going to let us put it out. But yeah, that one we know. And I just thought, but these it were like Lord at Flies all the way through, like these murderous, horrible children, when they burnt her arm and everything, and it really sadistic. But, a bit like Sleepaway Camp, when we talked about that, it's the reality of horrible children, isn't it? That they are cruel.
Absolutely. I think it definitely, one thing it does well in that, and it's definitely something that we've seen in all the films that we've covered, is that, that sense of bullying, that pecking order, very much like, Ziggy and that, that horrible girl who bullies her. I can't remember her name now, but, it's very much like, Angela in Sleepaway Camp, their only crime is to keep herself to herself. Yeah. That's exactly the case with Ziggy, and she's just being, being absolutely, terrified by those, by those Sunny Veilers for it. I do think the only thing maybe is that, the characters are very archetypes, right? So you got Sunny Veilers they're all the jocks, all the, like the popular kids, and Shady Siders are very much the underdogs, and we love to root for an underdog. So.
We love to root for an underdog. I mean, to be fair,
Absolutely.
I mean, they are all annoying. Ziggy's like, I'm angry at everybody shtick is annoying. But
that was my first note. I was like, she's such an angry child. She really needs to.
But I think it's the idea that she when they've like burnt her arm and then tried to hang her from a tree, she's still a problem because she's outsider and she's problem person, and I think that's a very recognisable experience for a lot of people, and I suppose it's feeds into that idea about being young and it's miserable, and when you're in settings. I mean, as I've said all the way through, I've never liked my peers. I've never wanted to be in a summer camp situation full of dickheads.
Yeah, even less now.
So I think I would have been like that, like just, can I please go home? But I think, that very extreme difference between Shady Siders and what are they called? I keep wanting to call it
Sunny Veilers.
I keep wanting to call it Sunnydale.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's only that would be a great crossover, by the way.
Yeah, that's what I kept expecting. But I did notice as well that there is always a handsy creep. So we've got Tommy, and she's buttoned up. What's her name? Oh God, I've
Cindy.
Cindy. I've got to get better at this. She's buttoned up and she's this little snitch, and she's very prim, isn't she? And then he's all handsy, grab-assing.
Yeah, well, he's trying. He's trying his best, definitely. But that's very much of the era as well. I thought that was kind of
and you just think, come on now, Tommy, stop being a creep. But I do think that she's, again, what I like about it, and again you've said it already, is that there's a lot more depth to it. So you see that she's under a lot of strain, that she's got a single mom who's got to send them there because she's got to work, and she's trying to be this version of herself, and obviously, as we see through film, that gets tested and sort of unravels. But that idea that she's like trying her best and really and it's very sad.
Absolutely. In that idea of intergenerational trauma, actually, I find Cindy a very interesting character, because yes, she is buttoned up, she is annoying, she's a snitch, she has no fun, and Alice makes the case of this through and through in the film. It's kind of like, you used to have fun, now you think you're better than all of us, and blah blah. But you can see that because of their circumstances with their mom, that she's really trying to transcend her her social standing, basically, to become it's a horrible thing to say, but like to better herself and her situation in order to she wants to to get out of this, basically, to give herself the best chance, obviously not knowing that this curse runs much deeper than anything that she could do to to escape it. But I find again that's really interesting in terms of the complex storytelling that this film brings in opposition to so many slashers of the same era, where it's very much all about the kills. This, in fact, there are a lot of kills, and they are very gory and stuff, like surprisingly gory, in fact, but it takes a long time to set it up, right? I think the first kill happens maybe 45 minutes in, and then you get one kill every 10 minutes. But it takes time to like to set up even the story of Tommy before before he gets possessed and starts killing his peers. You get a chance to know him. So I find that very interesting.
And it's not like, there's no killing for ages and it's boring like Friday the 13th. Sorry, I'm shitting on Friday the 13th again. But it's because there's so much going on, and because the characters have got actual like quite rich lives that you see. They're not just wandering about going, oh, Moon's nice tonight. Oh yeah, Moon's brilliant. Like,
great moon tonight.
Yeah, great moon, baby. It's and I think there is what's interesting for me as well is as well as this like generational curse, there's like a real class element to it as well. So they're obviously, you know, like Cindy's been saving up for a polo, and they ain't got a lot of money, and she's, you know, like you said, she's trying to get out, like she wants to get away, she wants to go somewhere else, and she thinks if she can do all these things and like transcend the life she's in, that things will get better. But obviously we know then as film progresses, and if you've seen first one and then you see third one, it's not what I think is an interesting part about it is, and again that idea about intergenerational trauma is it takes a supernatural element, so like the witch's curse, but it's telling a very relatable story, which is that it don't matter how hard you work, sometimes you cannot, it's not about you and your personal strengths or failures, you can't transcend what you're in. And I think it does that in a very interesting way, but still with that horror element.
Yes, definitely.
But also as an aside, where are the adults in charge? The only adult in this is the nurse.
I know.
Where
it's
are
the
they?
nurse who, well, I was going to say that is very much, you know, finding its roots maybe in the slashers of the same era, where basically, the adults are nowhere to be found, or when they are there to be found, they are completely useless. Yes, but you're right. I mean, the only adults we effectively see is the nurse for a whole of 2 minutes when she loses her shit, tries to kill Tommy. And and then she's just there to move the plot along, right? They find her diary, and and this is where they go to find the witch's house. But apart from that, she serves no purpose, and she's evacuated from the camp. So effectively, those kids are left to their own device,
just left on their own. Just a lot of teenagers in charge of slightly younger kids. That's and all. I mean, I think and that would be not why ain't anyone stopping these horrible kids. She's like Judy, with hair. Who picks on her. She is like Judy. She's very arms folded, sassy, mean girl.
Yes, absolutely. I made exactly that note. I said because her name is Sheila, and I said
Sheila.
Equivalent to Judy in Sleepaway Camp.
Sheila, that's it. Sheila sucks. Sheila's awful. She's a horrible girl. But God, that fucking hippie skinning up while they were having the tea, just rolling this split. And honestly, like this shagadelic neato speech she gives about, we're all peace and love. Peace and love. And I was like, oh my God, like you're really, really tiresome, aren't you? Like anyone who says shagadelic, unironically, deserves what they get, in my opinion. 70s or not.
Absolutely. Deserve an axe to the face, and sooner rather than later.
Well, I think we also need to talk about the fact as well that while they're all sat there eating, and Tommy's obviously possessed at this point, although I did think maybe he just had a concussion, but they weren't a thing in 70s. But, he did get his head rattled pretty hard when the nurse tried to murder him. But, we start to see that the sort of the curse of Shadyside. Creeping. It comes creeping
in.
Yeah. What gets me with that is the flies, which is explained in the third one, but like always have like flies buzzing around them, and I was like, ooh, that's gross. So why ain't anybody noticing? Why ain't anybody noticing that it's got all flies?
I mean, they are teenagers at a camp. You can imagine that.
Yeah. I imagine there's an odor there, an odor problem.
BO
throughout.
Is a thing, definitely.
But I did think it were really clever, actually. Like what I like about this as well is that they work very cleverly with like location to make it make sense, because we've seen in other films where they've just like shoehorned in a rationale for why, but this is like camps on site, and I thought it were really clever how they'd set it up so everybody were outside because they were playing capture the flag, so then it were like maximum carnage because everybody's in woods. And I did really like it. I mean, I think it's again like that I suppose that referential thing, like there's very much a call back to slashers, but also when they've defaced a bunk. I mean, the bullying in this is is beyond the pale.
It's unreal. Yeah, it's non-stop.
It's non-stop. It's beyond the pale. It's like, why is no one doing anything to stop this? This is not like, I don't like you can't sit with us. This is graffitiing Ziggy sucks cocks in hell above a bed.
I mean, this is where you think there are literally no adults around because, how can they be ignoring, such blatant abuse?
Yeah, it's really... And then, like, the absolute Lord of the Flies element of that, which is like, they tried to murder her.
Oh, my God.
Probably would have murdered her if nobody had have come across what they were doing. And then they've, like, graffitied her bunk. But I did like that callback to Stephen King. And like Carrie and everything. I did like it.
Yeah. All the little nods to this I loved.
Yeah, I did really like that. And I think, like the sort of callback to the slashers, but but really rooting it in this idea about a curse. Very innovative, I thought. But they all, I mean, I've never been to a summer camp, and I know you had your personal experience of being a camp counsellor. But I have never seen a group of people take a game of capture the flag so seriously in all my life.
Yeah, it was very intense.
Too much, if anything. Too much.
Yeah. I didn't think it was a thing. I mean, when he came on screen, my note was flag war, another shitty camp activity. Although I said, at least there are kids in this film. But oh my God, like I was actually, I'd forgotten from watching the film the first time that, there's quite a gruesome murder scene in that film involving a kid, and I was like, they really went for it. Yeah. Especially, and there's, I feel like with slashers there's always an element of, when a character that you usually don't care about, who is a bit of a shithead, gets killed, you always be like, yay! Yeah. But in this case, I was like, this poor kid who gets an axe to the face. I was like, he's actually like, I actually really felt sorry for him because he wasn't having the best time to begin with. And, was like really struggling to keep his prisoners, back, in the cabin where they were. And then this happens. And you just think there's surely like, slashers out there to serve some form of justice as well. So that was pretty brutal.
I thought that.
I found.
I was watching it going, they're not going to kill that nerd. He's a nerd. No, nerds don't die. They're not going to kill him. And then, my God, axed him to death.
They went for it.
I mean, I couldn't believe it. And I know what you mean. They really went for it. They weren't like holding back. I mean, which again, when you see the third one, the ending of it and all the little, little white sheets, it all makes sense. But at the time, I just thought they're never going to kill all these kids because normally the kids don't die, do they? It's the campers. But
exactly, except in sleepaway camp.
Well,
but
except in sleepaway camp.
Maybe that was a nod back to that.
Yeah, probably.
Could be.
But I mean, one trend that I do wish it hadn't brought with it, and you might anticipate where I'm going with this, is the absolutely terrible sex scenes, of which there are two. And both of them are awful.
Absolutely awful.
So we've got Alice nearly getting her head smashed off on a boombox.
Yeah.
What is happening there? And I've never seen out like that. Well, obviously I have. I'm being dramatic there. But do you know what I mean? Like, she's getting, a brain knocked out on a boombox by this guy in a cowboy hat. Gross. Bad enough. But then it gets worse because then we've got Shagadelic Nito, which capture the flag, guy who's taking it, who's like, don't let me down, or we're all, you're all going to die. I'm like, it's capture the flag, mate. Get a personality.
Yeah, this cannot be a personality for the summer. Come on, Kat.
Get something else to do. Well, he has got another personality, we find out. He's a misogynist narc because he has sex with this girl who apparently really digs him. I've got no idea why. And then goes, don't tell anybody. And then when she's like smoking a spliff that she's, so artfully rolled earlier, he's like, oh, you're smoking weed? It's like, you fucking square. Come on.
Yeah. Is it because I think he's from Sunnyvale and she is a shady cider, right?
Yes, I think so.
That's the reason why he's kind of like, let's keep it on the low down.
And also, she's horrifically annoying. She says shagadelic and Nito. She's a very annoying person, but that doesn't mean she deserves to be so disrespected.
Well, exactly.
And I do think that, like, God, I can't. It's so gross. When they're like having sex, she calls him Big Boy at one bit, and I was like, I've got calling him Big Boy, puke emoji. That would be note for this. Calling him Big Boy, absolutely repellent. Absolutely shocking. More shocking to me than the murder of that nerd.
Talking of repellent characters, should we address the elephant in the room?
Oh, go on.
Fucking Nick Goad. Nick Goad.
Boo. Boo.
I did like you texted me whilst you were watching it saying, yeah, I called that from the start.
Yeah.
You're like, I knew it was a shit.
I knew he were a wrong'un. I knew it. From 1994,
Yeah.
I watched it, I was like, wrong'un. I know it. And I was right. But then, I mean, I do think they did handle that in a bit of a sensitive way, where him at first going, I can't go out with you because I'm a counsellor and you're a camper. I mean, obviously then they just ignored that, but at least they tried. At least they brought it in.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, he's just weird.
I think it was, talking about, if we, we were talking about, Cindy, obviously, and how she's trying to, she's kind of changed the fabric of her being to, in the hope that she's going to escape a situation. I think with him, there's, it's obviously has this dirty little secret, but I still think he can have the fun, and I think this is why he's so attracted by Ziggy, because he thinks that that he doesn't want to be seen as the bad guy, basically, right? He wants to be, but he is, and I just think he kind of represents this idea of, everything as well as someone being complicit or being at the, in a way, the bullies, they wear it on they wear their heart on their sleeve. They are, they're there to make her life miserable.
Yeah.
But that's for him. It's kind of like he's doing all these things to be like, it's a bit like Kurt, it's kind of like, I want to be on your side, but, don't tell anyone. I can't be seen to do this. I can't be seen to do that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I think it's that
the fake ally,
the worst of the worst, the fake liberal.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. We all know one of them.
The liberal misogynist, the worst kind of misogynist. But yeah, I think. Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, that they're all very open about the fact that they think she's a piece of shit because she's from Shadyside. Whereas he's like, I'm not like them, but you're not doing enough to stop it, because that would involve, putting yourself in a difficult position. So you want to stand there and be like, I'm not really like that, but you don't actually want to show that with your actions. And I suppose, as we know, well, we may as well. I mean, I suppose we're just going to spoil us out.
Yeah.
But so I was thinking this. So when in 1978, has he already had his initiation at that point?
Mm-hmm.
So he already.
Well, I think he has, because he does say that when his dad died, he said he's lost his dad, and that his dad had a talk with him before he died about his responsibilities and all like this. So I think he already knows what's going to happen.
Well, yeah, and then I suppose we see in 1666 that, because obviously, again, spoilers. I don't know why I'm saying it. We've told them we're going to spoil it. We're spoiling it.
We're spoiling it. That's it's happening.
That's what's happening. We're doing it. But when she dies, that she's proper dead. I mean, she was, very horrifically stabbed numerous times, and I was like, he's only doing CPR on her ear. I don't see how that'd bring her back to life when she's being eviscerated, essentially. But we know then, obviously, that's because he had the power to bring her back. So he did.
Yeah.
Which makes sense then, because when it got to end, I was like, oh, that feels a bit tacked on. Like,
how?
He wouldn't have brought her back with some, chest compressions, like she'd been stabbed, So I think, but again, that's why it works so well as a trilogy, and why it's so important to see them all, I think, because then everything, it all weaves in together in a really interesting way.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. And I think it'd be so easy to think the story is, there's so many plot holes, and it's, it's a bit incoherent if you watch only part 1 and part 2. Part 3 really kind of brings it together. So if you can get past the terrible Irish accent, and I know it's a bit of a joke for me to take a piece of an accent when, listen to my own, But seriously, it's that even I did find it very difficult to watch. I was like, why did they do that?
Well, first things first, you've got a wonderful accent. But second thing is, I did message you and say, why have they given them Irish accents? I don't understand this. What a strange choice. Because none of these people are Irish. Why did they have to be Irish? Why couldn't they have just had their own accents? I don't understand.
I know, exactly.
So yeah, if you can get past that, and also, to be fair, the accents are very intermittent, so you don't have to endure it for the entire
Yes, exactly.
film.
Not the whole way through. So get past it for the first 5 minutes. After that, even they forget to put on the accents. So it's fine.
There is no consistency in the accents in part 3. But yeah, I mean, the only thing that I think annoyed me about it is that I didn't like that Ziggy went to save Sheila, because she should have just left her there to rot. I would have. And I think, again,
absolutely,
it's that thing of, if Ziggy is the final girl, and if she's the redeemable character and we're supposed to feel for her, then she's got to be good. And to be good means forgiving someone who's tried to murder you and forgiving someone who's made your life a misery. And I just think it's a thing that they put on women characters as well, I think, a lot, is this idea that,
that's very true.
Be the bigger person. You've got to be the bigger person. And I want to be a bigger person. And I left her covered in beetles to get fucking axed to death. With no guilt at all. Because I'm sure she wouldn't have gone to get Ziggy.
Absolutely.
And so, that was the only thing that annoyed me, because I just thought it's, again, this idea that, so she's being a bit arsey, and she's being a bit, she's got a bit of an attitude
exactly
problem.
But it's all for show, clearly.
And really, she's the bigger person.
But it's the same with Alice, right? That they both have this very nihilistic, approach to them. But then when it comes to the crunch, then, the same thing happens to... once the first kill happens and her and Cindy are, they can't find their way out of those caves, and, they kind of switch immediately. Cindy becomes, more in charge and more, compassionate, and, and Alice cracks under the pressure rather than being kind of like, well, fuck it. And fighting back,
Yeah, and that like attitude of, like I said, nihilism and no matters, and I'm a little badass, and you're just a narc, and you're a snitch, and it all falls away. And I do think they have quite a touching moment though, when she's like, you were my friend, and then you drop me, and then for Cindy to reckon with that and be like, actually, I were a pretty shit friend, and it's because I had these fears and I really wanted to change. And then we have the Alice's revelation about when she said, we all have our own ways to deal with Shadyside. And I think that brings in a really important point, that people are going through things and they don't always show it. And someone can look really cavalier and, carefree and on outside, but inside.
Exactly, it's just to hide their own traumas. Definitely, I did think that was like dealt with really, really well, actually, because she gets to tell her story at some point, right? She said that she saw her dad being taken, to go to prison when she was 6 and stuff like this. So again, plays in the idea of that curse and that intergenerational trauma and how it's affected them, and gives them that sense of nihilism, which then you're right with Ziggy, kind of like it doesn't. Then it doesn't feel right that because she's the final girl, she has to also, become the hero. Yeah. She should be saving herself, just
but
as would be expected of a male character.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, even with that idea as well, like you say about Alice, and she saw her dad go to prison, and then she's like living with a single mum as well. And then her mum, I think she says her mum drinks, or so she's had this very difficult upbringing, and it's all this idea that it's the curse of Shadyside. But again, coming back to that, how that happens in communities that aren't cursed by an ancient witch, that are cursed by capitalism and neoliberalism and the Tories.
Exactly.
The Tories.
But in fact, I mean, that curse of Shadyside is a curse of capitalism, right? It's like some people have to, in order for shit to rise to the top. They gotta drown everything else. So
But I mean, I do think that Alice is the real victim in this film, because not only did she break a leg, which was sickening, the effects were very, very good. But then when they were trying to get her out of that hole, and I thought, don't drop her on that leg, and they did, and I was like, this is like torture porn at this point. This poor lass.
I mean, It really was. Yeah, she really was very unlucky with it. And also, they were trying to pull them out of a toilet, by the way, of a camp toilet, which is a massive drop. And like, it did make me laugh at some point when they're trying to do this, and Ziggy shouts, "My sister and her friend are in the toilet." And it's just like this, something you don't hear every day.
They're in the toilet, and also idea that you would be able to pull a full-grown woman up on a bucket attached to a rope. That would support the weight of a full-grown woman up basically a cliff face. And then, how was she supposed to get out of the toilet? That's what I'm like, how is she getting out of this toilet?
It made no sense. There was, and I did feel for poor Gary, who's doing all the pulling, this whole time, and then as they get to the top, then he just gets his head chopped off.
Poor Gary.
By Gary, who had asked nothing of anyone. Gary
had done nothing. He
didn't have to be there.
Gary was innocent. Yeah, Justice for Gary. Gary had done nothing other than try to be helpful. But yeah, when they were trying to get her out of that toilet, and I thought, I don't know how. I don't understand. Anyway, I mean, plot holes, let's not pick it apart, I guess. But, when they are in them tunnels, which I think is a really interesting aspect that obviously goes through all three films, that idea about the tunnel from, that goes all the way through with the gross pulsating glob of flies. And I did wonder to myself, about Alice, why would you touch it?
Yes, I had exactly the same note. I was like, why would that be your first reaction to touch it rather than, cower away? I mean, we've seen a lot of weird, behavior in slashers, be like, Cropsy with the skull, pulling it towards him, Alice touching that blob. You just think, why? It's just, nah.
I mean, in times of great stress, sometimes we do things that we might not normally do, but I can't think of a scenario in which if I saw a giant slimy pulsating glob of flies that my first response would be, I think I better touch that. But she did anyway.
Something good might come out of it.
And
she did anyway.
And she went a bit, and then she saw all the victims of the curse, and then it moved the story along, I suppose. But at least if she'd have tripped on it, or accidentally touched it, then I could have got behind it.
Would have made more sense, yeah.
But to just be like, ooh.
But willingly, yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean,
repulsive.
Maybe that's just me and you. I mean, I don't even like to sit on bus seats, so maybe I'm just a germaphobe.
Let's ask the audience, what would you guys do?
Yes. Let us know. Would you have touched the pulsating glob of flies?
We'll have to post it and ask, definitely.
Yeah.
So all this being said, I'm so curious to find out what folklore you digged out for us this week. Talking about this film. I can't wait. I'm really curious.
Well, I mean, I've exhausted the Cropsy legend. We've gone on various adventures about, folk songs last week. If anyone listened and heard Clelia's horror at the thought that I were going to sing to her. So what I thought I would do this time, given that Shadyside is haunted as shit, I thought it would be a good idea to explore urban legends about haunted or cursed towns. So, so I have three. We'll start in the UK and then I shall move stateside. With the home of the murdering misogynist witchfinder general himself, Matthew Hopkins. Now, if anyone's not familiar with Matthew Hopkins, good for you.
Lucky you.
So, Hopkins was the self-appointed Witchfinder General, I might add. That was never a title bestowed on him by anybody but himself. And he sent more people to be hanged for witchcraft than all other witch hunters in England combined over the previous 160 years. So that gives a sense of scale to this individual. And he was solely responsible, for the increase in witch hunts during the time that he was active as Witchfinder General. And he was responsible for the death of at least 300 women from between 1644 to 1647. So Matthew Hopkins was, a piece of shit. I mean, I may as well get that out.
There's no other way around it. Yeah.
But basically, extorted villagers and communities who were terrified of witchcraft by offering to rid them of their witches for payment, of course. And so were responsible for killing, well, at least 300 women, but we know it were many more. And I just thought that was quite a shocking fact that, like, in the previous 160 years combined by all the witch finders, didn't kill as many women as Matthew Hopkins. And I'm sure.
I mean, it's so shocking, isn't it? This guy was so dedicated to killing women, as many women as he could.
As many women as possible. So he was born and died in Manningtree in Essex, and that's now said to be haunted by his ghost, particularly the Red Lion pub, which is where he publicly accused his first victim, the elderly and infirm Elizabeth Clark, who was then dragged from the pub and sentenced to death. By hanging. And her ghost is said to haunt the nearby mudflats of Seafield Bay, which I think is very sad. But people have reported strange goings on in the pub, and staff will not be there alone, and it's said to be quite a haunted place. And apparently, Hopkins' ghost is also reported to be visible, particularly on nights with a full moon, near the Mistley Ducking Pond and the Hopping Bridge at St Mary's Church in Mistley. So if anyone knows anything about the witch trials, the Ducking Pond was used to dunk women, usually on ducking stools, whereas the Hopping Bridge involved tying women's limbs together and then throwing them into the water. And in the great misogynist logic of the day, if they swam, then they'd be pulled out and hanged. But if they drowned, then they weren't witches and heaven would accept them.
Yeah.
Fair trial, I think, comes to mind. So, thankfully, Matthew Hopkins died at around age 28. And some have suggested that he was accused of witchcraft and was himself thrown from the Hopping Bridge, bound and thrown into the water before floating and being dragged out and hanged. But it's much more likely that he died of consumption. And I find it quite reassuring to think of him drowning in his own blood before haunting the sites of his crimes for eternity.
Either way, let's hope it was just a horrible death. And slow.
So that's the UK example.
I was just going to say, I find it, I find it difficult to believe that, not to believe, but I mean, I like the idea that is not, his ghost is not still roaming around this earth, because I want to believe that if there is such a thing as heaven and hell, is definitely, he's down there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
In the bad part of hell.
In
because,
the bad bit.
Hell can be a party place.
Yeah. Not in the party zone. He's in one of the rings, one of Dante's rings.
Exactly.
But yeah, I mean, I'm sure we're going to talk about Matthew Hopkins and witch trials generally in future series, perhaps. Who knows? But yeah, so now if we move stateside, thinking about the historical haunting aspect of Shadyside, there's the haunted town of Bodie. And Bodie is a former prospecting town in California. So it's found in the Bodie Hills, which is east of the Sierra Nevada mountain range. And the town became a boom town in 1876 after there was the discovery of a gold vein in the area. So it was this really noisy, hard, scrabbling town of about 10,000 people with over 60 saloons for 10,000 people. It sounds like my kind of town, I've got to be honest.
This sounds just about right.
And gunfights were common, perhaps understandably. But by 1915, it were a ghost town. And it's now an authentic Wild West ghost town. So it's kept in what they call a state of arrested decay, which I think is a very interesting term. So what that means is that the California Parks and Recreation manage the town. And so they'll repair things to a point, but they won't improve it. So everything's kept in this arrested decay. And so visitors can go and they can tour the deserted streets and crumbling buildings, and you can see that a lot of houses, they're just abandoned. They're just, all the items are left, family homes are just, everything's still there. Where does the haunting come in, you might ask? So the legend is that if you take anything from Bodie, if it's a stone, a nail, a shard of china, anything, that you will be cursed. So the staff who run Bodie now get regular curse letters with visitors returning stolen artefacts and apologising for the crimes. So one such letter reads, "Dear Bodie, I'm sorry that I took this piece of metal from the town. I thought it was all a joke, but it wasn't at all. Things are happening that are very hard to explain." So that's a letter from 2003. A letter from 2002. "Fair warning for anyone that thinks this is just folklore. My life has never seen such turmoil. Please take my warning and do not remove even a speck of dust." So What's interesting...
Oh.
Oh, it's brilliant, isn't it? But what's interesting about this, though, is that this curse and this idea of a haunting doesn't come from, prospectors. It doesn't come from ghost hunters. It came from the California Department of Parks and Recreation, who basically wanted to stop people from stealing. So they basically started telling people it's cursed, don't steal, don't touch things. But the effect there's been a sort of impact of this that the Department of Parks and Rec did not expect. So now they get so many letters and artifacts being returned that they've had to create a museum to display everything.
That's fantastic.
and so for some people who send artifacts back, it's very supernatural, ghostly sightings, poltergeist activity. But for most people, this curse manifests as just the worst bad luck: car accidents, job losses, car trouble. Another letter reads, "Please find enclosed one weatherby and old shoe. The shoe was removed from Bodie during the month of August 1978.
Oh my God.
My trail of misfortune is so long and depressing it can't be listed here." Oh, yes. So, as a result, the staff no longer tell visitors that there's a curse. So they just don't mention it.
They're just like, don't mention it, let them find out. I can imagine if people watch Parks and Recs, I can just imagine Leslie Knope putting such a curse on park property. That's great.
But yeah, and they don't mention it for a very mundane reason, which is that every time someone returns something, they have to treat it as a stolen object and file a police report. So that's a lot of paperwork for like a nail or a shard of a china plate. But what I think is interesting, and it's something that I thought I would discuss, is there's also the issue of historical disturbance, and this idea that once these pieces are removed from Bodie, they lose the context and their significance. And so when people are returning like a shoe or a nail, or the staff have got no idea where it came from, so they can't replace it, they can't return it to where it resides. So that's why they've had to build this museum, and everything ends up in boxes, and they've got all these things. So my advice to listeners is that if you are visiting a historical site in the future, I would suggest keeping your sticky fingers to yourself.
Exactly. Just don't steal. Thou shalt not steal.
No, absolutely. So, third and final example then, and this fits very well with what we've been talking about. There's the curse of Ramia's Hollow, also known as Hex Hollow, found in Stewartstown, Pennsylvania. So in 1928, a local man named John Blymier believed that he'd been cursed by a suspected witch, Nelson Ramia. And so many people in the area, and it's very common in Pennsylvania, believe in a form of magic known as powwow, and it mixes elements of Christian and European folk-like remedies and medicine and belief, and it's very culturally specific to that area. So Blymier himself was a powwow doctor, but thought that he'd been cursed. So he'd had this string of illnesses and bad luck, and they were convinced that, someone had hexed him, and he was trying to find out who. So he went to see Nellie Knoll, also known as the Marietta River Witch, which is quite the title. And she told him that he'd been cursed by Ramia. I'll say Ramia, we'll stick to that. So according to some, and isn't it always the way, that Nellie Knoll would be blamed for this, the only woman involved in this would be blamed. She told John Blymier that he needed to bury a lock of Ramia's hair and burn his copy of The Long Lost Friend, which is a book commonly employed by powwow practitioners. So, on November the 26th, 1928, Blymier and a friend spent a very peaceful evening with the 6'2", a very powerfully built Ramier, because he realised that he wouldn't be able to subdue him with just one accomplice. So the next night they returned, and a struggle ensued, after which Ramier was dead. So, unable to find the book, the trio attempted to burn down the house. Now, where this idea of hauntings and curses comes in is that neither Ramier's body or the house would burn, and instead it just smouldered slightly. And so this was taken as evidence of both Ramier's power as a powwow practitioner, and also the sort of strength of his magic, that his house would not be burnt to the ground. And the house is still standing to this day, and it is now a museum. And what they've done is preserved the small patch of floorboards that were singed, and you can see it. But my favourite, with the era we talk about ghosts, apparently there's many ghostly goings on in Hex Hollow. But my personal favourite story is that apparently if you throw a rock at the house, it will throw it back.
I tell you what, that would have been useful when Richie threw the rock.
It would have been useful. It did make me think of that when I was looking at the house. I was like, oh yeah, oh yeah. So yes, they are my cursed towns.
Love them. I absolutely love them. You need to write a book, Meg. I mean, a travel book. We need to go on a tour, basically.
We need a Monstrous Flesh on tour. People, send us your haunted locations, your spooky places. Tell us where they are. We can build an itinerary.
I love that. We'll go and investigate them.
Yes. We've got the Penis Festival in Japan. That's still on the list.
First stop.
Now we've got Hex Hollow. Bodie, as long as we don't take anything. They have got a gift shop, though, but apparently that's fine. That don't curse things, which is good because I can't resist a gift shop. It's my weakness.
Exactly.
My weakness. But, what about recommendations then? I'm interested in your recommendations after this.
I'm really sorry to say that I completely forgot to write down recommendations for this. I think because I was so consumed into rewatching the first trilogy and then to look into the books. I'm not making excuses, but obviously watching the film, they keep mentioning Carrie and Salem's Lot, and it made me very curious to the fact that they are remaking Salem's Lot. So I'm very, I can't wait to see the remake, although I have a soft spot for the original. Not a lot of people do, but
I mean, as long as it's not a Pet Cemetery.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, who would have thought that? I mean, and I do have a soft spot in the funniest way for the original, but I couldn't have, who would have thought that to remake that film, they could make it worse.
A waste of John Lithgow. That's what that is.
Absolutely.
That's what that is.
Very much so. But what about you?
Oh, okay. All right.
Can you compensate for my lack of research?
Well, first I was thinking about, this idea about trauma in horror. And I've got a book. I just keep bringing books. So I've got The Final Girls Support Group by Grady Hendrix.
Great book.
And there's also a novella called The Final Girl by Stephen Graham Jones and My Heart is a Chainsaw and Don't Fear the Reaper, which is a sort of pair from Stephen Graham Jones, and I'll sing Stephen Graham Jones's praises from now until the end of time. So moving on, I thought about the Halloween reboot, which very much goes into Laurie's trauma and the impact of living after you've experienced such a violent event. And I know not a lot of people liked him. I don't care. No bad word will be said about Jamie Lee Curtis.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I'm totally with you on that one. Yeah. I love it.
And I know a lot of people didn't like the third one, but I think that did a very interesting thing that Fear Street does as well, talking about like collective trauma and the nature of towns and like social traumas that I thought was good. So anyway, don't come at me. I won't listen. I won't respond to it.
Let us live our best life with our best Final Girls, okay? It's the same way. I don't want to hear a bad word on Fear Street. Same with Halloween, okay? Keep it to yourself.
And then I also had The Witch. Obviously, I thought that'd be a good one. And then
a good replacement for the third part, definitely.
And I got Witchfinder General if people are interested in seeing Vincent Price as Matthew Hopkins. I will say that it is quite a traumatic film in many ways.
Chilling, yeah.
But I think it does really give a sense of the sort of paranoia and fear and violence of that time. And then finally, YouTube. Where is our sponsorship? I've got another YouTube recommendation. So
patron saint of this podcast.
So someone has made a documentary called Hex Hollow: Witchcraft and Murder in Pennsylvania. So yes,
I'm going to be watching that.
Yes, so you can watch that on YouTube, and that covers the case, which I think is a really fascinating case. Actually, I didn't want to go too deep into it, but I do think it's very interesting, and the fact that the house didn't burn and stuff it gives it an extra frisson for me.
Yeah.
An extra spark,
Good
you
word,
might
that.
say. Oh, so last day of camp, campers.
This is
So,
it.
well,
Closing summer
Well,
on a high.
yeah. Yes. Well, I'm sure that people will see us soon in the future, perhaps.
It was such a great, it was so great to do this mini series with you, Meg. Again, it was absolutely amazing. Really great to be able to revisit, and to revisit some old camps that we that we hadn't for a while. To visit some new ones and to be like, no, thank you. Yeah. And I was going to say, and just to get another view on this this subgenre and like genuinely, I know we've laughed a lot about about those films and how dated they are, but I actually personally it's a subgenre that I love, and I'd quite like to see more summer camp horror being made now, a bit like Fear Street. So come on, filmmakers, give us some more.
Yes, I agree, and it has also confirmed to me that I don't like my peers, I don't like camping, I don't want to be outside. And I would not thrive in a camp environment, and that's all right.
No.
But yes, I have also very much enjoyed our tour across the camps of America. It's been very fun. And I'm like you, I really hope that people start making, modern summer slashers, because I just think it's a really fun subgenre that seems to have like tailed off a little bit, and people don't seem to be doing it as much, which is a shame. So yes.
Exactly. Bring it back.
Yeah, bring it back. Long may they reign. Well, until next time then, everyone.
Until next time. I mean, it is the end of August, and it's very sad we're making our way into September. And with September, means school is back, people. And whilst I may be very sad, we have something very exciting planned for next week. Yes. A little bonus episode to close this mini series. Yeah. We will be having a special back to school episode. We'll be reviewing The Faculty, which celebrates its 25 years since its release this year, so it's super excited to do that. Yeah. So we'll see you all back next week.
Yeah, see you then. Thanks for listening to Monstrous Flesh Summer Camp. We look forward to seeing you next summer. In the meantime, keep your eyes peeled for our next mini-series, Halloween Horrors. We'll see you in October for a spooky series exploring all our favourite horrors to watch during our high holy season. You can find out more about us via our website, monstrousflesh.co.uk, where you can find out more about our research for each episode, buy our wonderful merch, and see our upcoming events. We'd love to hear from you, either via our email or social media channels, and also please rate and review wherever you listen to podcasts and help us spread our spooky word by telling your friends about Monstrous Flesh. Until next time, creep it weird, everyone!